Hey everybody, happy Monday and welcome to another Techstrong TV broadcast. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon. Today is Monday, May 16th, and we have a great lineup on tap for you on today's show. We get things kicked off with a conversation between Alan and Aaron Cow, who is the VP of Marketing over at Pulumi. Pulumi recently had its Pulumi Up conference where they announced, among other things, a universal infrastructure as code to all cloud builders, developers, and infrastructure experts. It's called Pulumi Crosscode, and it's a language and cloud agnostic infrastructure as code engine that enables development and operations teams to build infrastructure in the Pulumi environment and in some of the most popular and powerful programming languages out there. Certainly a nifty new technology, and Aaron and Alan parse it out for you. After that, we have the return of the haunted hacker. Mike's been off for a couple weeks doing some other things, but now he's back and he's got a haunted hacker podcast for us. This is part one of a two-part conversation that Mike has with Alex Berta, who provides threat intelligence, cybersecurity, and incident response services. And they have a very serious talk about the darker side of the internet and the risk to children. And as part of that conversation, they discuss how volatile and toxic social media can be for kids. And Alex also shares some of his intelligence gathering stories. They also, on the lighter side, talk about fun with 3D printing. So definitely want to check out this conversation. We will run part two in tomorrow's episode, but here's part one for you today. After that, we have our Something Old segment, and this one is from the recent Secure Software Summit. This is a presentation by Mike Wireman, who is a senior manager at Accenture. Mark's presentation is titled Security and Compliance, One and the Same, and he has a lot to unpack in his presentation. It really focuses on governance and how critical it is, and it really should be the starting point in any security operations endeavor. And so as part of that presentation, Mark walks us down the road, if you will, for effectively having compliance in security and having them interoperate effectively and really be one and the same at the end of the day. It is a great presentation. Definitely want to check that one out. After that, I am back with the headlines, and then I have a great conversation with John Anthony, who is the CEO of Conversant Group. John and I talk about some of the vulnerabilities that exist in local government and police departments and how they can help keep hackers out. Specifically, John talks about how hackers are gaining access to email accounts and websites that are tied to police departments and other government agencies, and then they're sending emergency data requests claiming it's a life or death situation. When that happens, you don't need to have a warrant, you don't need to have any sort of official paperwork, if you will, to get access to personal data if it's a life or death situation. And so that has really opened up a lot of data breaches related to personal information and organizations, especially in police departments and government organizations, being able to protect that data. So John and I talk about ways that they can do that moving forward. Great conversation. After that, I've got the webinar's preview for you, and then we close things out with a view with Vizard. In this one, Mike Vizard is speaking with Jason Shepard, who is a vice president of ecosystem at Zededa, and they discuss why deploying Kubernetes at the edge can be a unique challenge. Definitely a conversation worth checking out. That's today's lineup, and it's a good one, folks. Hope you can stick around for the entirety. I know I'll be here, but we're going to get things kicked off right after these commercial messages. All right, welcome back, everybody. Kicking off today's Techstrong TV broadcast, we've got a conversation between Alan and Aaron Cow, who's the VP of Marketing over at Pulumi. They're discussing some new technology out of the Pulumi Up conference. It's called Pulumi Crosscode, and it is a language and cloud agnostic infrastructure as code engine that enables development and operation teams to build infrastructure in some of the industry's most popular and powerful programming languages. Good stuff, great technology, and it's a great conversation. So let's go ahead and roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, I wanted to interject from our regular schedule today to show you a little conversation I recently had with my friend Aaron Cow. Aaron is the VP over at Pulumi. And if you guys are, I think most of you are familiar with Pulumi, but if you're not, you really should be. We've been following Joe Duffy and the Pulumi team for years now. And, you know, they've really become sort of a standard in the arena that they play in. Aaron will tell us more about it. They had their in their annual conference last week, virtual, and I was unable to attend, unfortunately, but I've asked Aaron to come on here and kind of share with us some of the highlights and news that came out of that event. And look, the event, the beauty of virtual events, it's available on demand. You're going to be able to go check it out. But let's first welcome Aaron and find out what's going on. Aaron, how are you, man? Thanks for joining us.
Hey, no problem, Alan. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Aaron, as I mentioned, we've followed Pulumi, and it's, you know, it's a great success story. But not everyone out here may be familiar with Pulumi. So why don't we, if you don't mind, let's start there. Let's give people a little level set of who Pulumi is.
Yeah, Pulumi is a universal infrastructure as code platform. It allows people to provision, manage infrastructure with modern programming languages. So everything from Python, TypeScript, .NET, Golang, and just this past conference, we announced the ability to use Java and YAML.
That's great. That's really nice. And those are obviously two big communities of programmers right there, right? That work in Java and YAML. Everything is YAML today. So that was announced at the show this year?
Yeah, that was announced. So, you know, during the show, we talked a lot about what we call universal infrastructure as code. So here at Pulumi, what we want to do is we want to be able to support every cloud. So most applications are spanning many different sort of SaaS services, different cloud providers. We want to support all of that. We want to be able to support every language. So we want to meet developers where they are. So different developers use different stacks. And, you know, as companies grow, they acquire other companies. So we want to be able to support the entire company, whatever language preference or whatever need they have. Then we want to be able to support every builder. So everyone from like the infrastructure experts on one end to, you know, application developers that may not be infrastructure experts. We want to support that entire spectrum. And then architectures have evolved quite a bit. You know, we have containers, Kubernetes, serverless, you know, hybrid architectures. We want to support all of that. And then finally, every format, no matter what IAC system you may have used before, we want to be able to support the ability for that to interoperate with Pulumi. So, yeah, really exciting. And just added new support to that with Java and YAML to really sort of build out that story.
Excellent. So, Aaron, this was... trying to think, was this the third year you guys have done this conference virtually?
No, this is the second year. It's the second annual Pulumi Up. Yeah.
Yep. Share with our audience maybe a little bit of a sense of, you know, I know it was a pretty popular event. What kind of registration or attendance? Because one of the nice things about these virtual events is you could even see the live chat that's going on there. You could kind of get a sense of what people are thinking and you know, saying. And it's usually a pretty nicely attended event.
There were a lot of people that had attended the event. We had thousands of registrants, and the chat was very lively. Just a lot of people with great excitement about this space, about using Pulumi and asking just deep technical architectural questions, and just really understood the message that what Joe was trying to deliver. So I thought it was a very exciting conference. It was my second one, and yeah, I enjoyed it.
Excellent. So Aaron, look, we're going to give people the URL. They go over and check this out on demand. But let's kind of try to key them in a little bit. What sessions do you think they should really key in on if they go over to watch it on demand?
I definitely think should watch the keynote, Joe's keynote. So Joe really walks us through sort of like the history and sort of the motivations of sort of modern cloud and why you need infrastructure as code and why you need a system like Pulumi. And then Luke Hoban, our CTO, dives into sort of the actual launches. So he does a Java and YAML demo. Then we also launched CDK on Pulumi, so a demo of that, and then our new AWSX packages. So I think that is a great session to attend. There's another one from a customer, Thomas at ElkJop, where he dives into his usage of Pulumi's automation API. They essentially built a self-service infrastructure portal within their company for developers to be able to self-provision infrastructure. It's very sleek, very sophisticated. I think that's great. Then we also have our engineers that actually built the Java and YAML support. They're actually, they did demos that went into a lot more depth than what Luke went into. So I think those are very worth checking out. Then lastly, we had a panel with Kellyanne Fitzpatrick moderating. There was a few different customer or not customers, a few different just experts in the industry. We had Brian Getz, Java architect at Oracle, Elad Ben Israel, who essentially he was the creator of the CDK. Chris Nova from Twilio, then Catherine Morgan from Kong. They all spoke in it, and roughly the panel. What we're trying to really understand is, how does infrastructure fit into a developer's workflow today? What are some common abstractions? What are the systems they put in place to do automation at scale? So I think that one's a very worthwhile session to attend.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Should mention the moderator is from RedMonk, right?
That's right, Kellyanne.
Yep, Kellyanne's from RedMonk, and some of those other people is from some leading kind of players in this space. So it sounds like an excellent one. Hey, Aaron, you know what we didn't tell people, though? For people who want to go check this out on demand, where can they go?
Hey, Dave, just go to the Pulumi.com website. There's links everywhere there, or if not, Pulumi.com/Pulumi-up. Or you can visit our Pulumi TV channel on YouTube, or just follow us on Twitter. There's just going to be recaps and posts and a lot of great blog posts covering everything that happened that was launched yesterday.
You know what? For those who maybe are spelling challenged, spell Pulumi for them.
Pulumi, Pulumi.
Excellent, man. Hey, Aaron, I appreciate you coming on and kind of giving us a quick recap like this. Hey, for our audience, if you're interested in Pulumi, infrastructure as code, you probably heard of it. If you're not really familiar with it, you've at least heard of it. Go check it out. I think there's some great content there. You need to stay on top of if you want to be on top of your game. Aaron, best of luck with Pulumi. Hope to see you guys soon, whether it's at KubeCon or some events coming up in person, where we'll be in person again. Best of luck to you. Regards to Joe and the rest of the Pulumi team. Thanks for coming on today, man.
Thanks, Alan.
Appreciate it. Aaron Cow, VP Marketing at Pulumi here on Techstrong. We'll take a break. We're going to have another guest for you in a moment.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us here on another Techstrong interview for Techstrong TV. My guest for this one, first time on, I think it's first time on for the company as well as himself. Let me introduce you to Gregory Kurtzer. We're going to call him Greg if it's okay. Hey, Greg, welcome to Techstrong TV.
Thank you so much, Alan, for having me.
My pleasure. So I think people see the CIQ logo right behind you there. But I'm going to guess a lot of them aren't familiar with the company and your background and yourself. Why don't we start there, Greg? Let's give people a little corporate background and a little about who Greg Kurtzer is.
Sure, absolutely. So in terms of me, I'll start there because I'm good at talking about myself. I do it a lot, I think. So generally speaking, I came out of biochemistry. I came out of science. I worked in computing and high performance computing for the Department of Energy and spent about 18 years at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory under joint appointment with UC Berkeley. Yep. And really focusing on high performance computing. And one of the things I learned when I was doing that is in HPC, we've been using the same architecture for the last 28 years. And you'd think that in high performance computing, we'd always be cutting edge. And in most cases, that's true, but not with the base architecture. And this base architecture is a 28-year-old legacy, flat, monolithic architecture. And so we came together with CIQ to look at modernization of that architecture and see what we can do to better that architecture and make it more capable and more compatible with a lot of the innovations that have come out of enterprise, cloud, and hyperscale. And that was what really created us. Along that way, we also ended up becoming an operating system vendor as one of the projects that I created a long time ago called CentOS, which is a very widely utilized Linux distribution. It ended up, it was acquired by Red Hat, and Red Hat and CentOS recently end-of-lifed it. But that affected the community in a fairly negative way. So we ended up recreating it, and that's called Rocky Linux. And CIQ is the founding services support partner and sponsor of Rocky Linux and the Rocky Enterprise Software Foundation. So we, as CIQ, are really focused on software infrastructure across the board, everything from base operating system all the way through the stack, all the way to a gigantic cloud native, cloud hybrid, federated meta orchestration platform for workflows and data.
Love it. We're going to dive into that as well. I just want to make sure we're straight off the bat here. So is Rocky Linux is a fork of CentOS?
So the structural arrangement of CentOS and Red Hat and Rocky now has really pivoted a lot over the last year and a half since the initial announcement. The way it used to be was Red Hat and Red Hat Enterprise Linux was developed behind the doors of Red Hat. So it was a Red Hat product. Yep. And for CentOS to exist, we'd always have to go and get the sources, get all the same patches, and build everything in a very similar way. So we end up with a compatible operating system. Well, the announcement about CentOS being end of life is not the whole story. It starts there, but then they also pivoted it and they put it in front of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So now all of a sudden, CentOS, which used to be the child of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, has now become its parent almost overnight. And now CentOS Stream is what it's now called, is the parent of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and it's now the parent of Rocky, which puts Rocky and Red Hat as peers, which is a very different structure. But it's a very good structure for the community and for the enterprise Linux family of distributions, as I like to call it now.
Yep. No, that makes a lot more sense. Because I know you had mentioned CentOS end of life, and I'm like, I thought, but okay. So that now we understand what's going on there. In terms of the high performance computing platform, being 28 years old, and I think part of the problem is someone much smarter than me once told me, Greg, that especially in technology, we're much better at evolution than revolution, right? And so it's not surprising to me that what we've done is for 28 years just build new stuff on that same old foundation, right? And then it's like the backward compatibility issue, right? But the way Microsoft looks at it, the way versus, let's say, Apple looked at it, right? Microsoft really sacrificed a lot of functionality, perhaps, if you believe what people say, for the sake of backward compatibility, right? They wanted to make sure even if you were running, Windows 98, your 2008 software ran on it or whatever. Where with Mac, they just said, look, if you want to run the latest stuff, you're going to need to update it. Sorry, right? You got to get the latest OS or what have you. They've changed, CPU architecture. They were proprietary RISC, and they went to Intel. Now they're back to RISC or whatever the M1s are, right? Microsoft stayed with Intel 30 whatever years, 40 years. So it's not surprising to me that our high performance computing architectures have a similar story, right? No one wants to rip that Band-Aid off and just say, okay, we're gonna start, well, until now, right? And we're gonna start with something fresh. I want to talk about Rocky Linux. I want to talk about Rocky Linux in the cloud and who's offering it and stuff. But I want to talk a little bit about this too, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Tell us some of the stuff that you guys are doing. Is it called CIQ or?
Yep.
Is that the right? Yep. Tell us some of that story.
Originally, we called it Control IQ, but we didn't actually spell out control. It was CTRL, like the command on the keyboard. But we ended up, CIQ is just so much shorter and easier to tell people. So from a branding perspective, just easier. So we've been CIQ kind of ever since. The point that you just made is so profound to me. We are better, I think, at evolution rather than revolution, typically. And I do see this as we are looking at HPC from a completely different lens. And I would actually say we're looking at it from such a broader lens that what we're finding is that it is more applicable generally than it is as just a traditional high performance computing platform. And we're seeing a lot of cross-pollination now coming out of enterprise and others in terms of what their computing needs are. All of a sudden, we're seeing consumers of HPC who have never considered themselves HPC people before. Right. And now all of a sudden they have to do AI, ML training, they have to do compute and data-driven analytics, and they need kind of HPC to do that really well, or maybe they don't need it, but the capabilities that we've been able to create in HPC over the last 30 plus years has been massive. Why not leverage that? Why not kind of jumpstart into this by, again, cross-pollinating between these different communities? For as long as I've been doing HPC, it's always kind of funny because even within a single organization, you'd have the HPC team and you'd have the IT team, and they wouldn't talk, they wouldn't collaborate, they wouldn't even go out to lunch together half the time. But what we're finding is that, well, now due to the innovations coming out of non-HPC, as well as the innovations in HPC, now's the time for them actually to come together and for us to start working together and us to start leveraging each other. And I use containers to describe kind of the Pandora's box that we found in HPC, where we always wore blinders. We always enterprise is doing their thing, cloud is doing their thing. It doesn't apply to us. We know how to solve our problem. But containers really changed that. This is about 5-6 years ago. Containers started to really make significant inroads into HPC. And again, that kind of is like Pandora's box. That's the starting point. Now that we have containers, well, let's look at what else we've been missing out of the rest of the ecosystem, and how do we leverage that to better science? And again, as we do that, we're also finding that, well, we're kind of fitting both sides of the equation now. We're creating a compute platform that not only does traditional HPC and simulation and modeling and tightly coupled MPI applications, but we're also creating an architecture that can do AI, it can do ML, it can do cyclic training, it can do compute data-driven analytics, it can do all sorts of other things. And it can do it in a completely cloud native and cloud hybrid way. We can actually create clusters in AWS, clusters in Azure, clusters in multiple availability regions, clusters on-prem, clusters multi-prem, and we can actually federate them all together and make decisions on where should any workflow or job ever run based on things like, where is the resource and architecture availability? How much does it cost? And where's that data? Can we move that data? What is the data too big to move? Does it have a lot of gravity to it? And what's the data security model? So that's what we've been able to build. And that product or project is called Fuzzball. And it's a fun name, but it really describes kind of what it's doing from a scientific perspective, from astrophysics. Fuzzball is the center of a black hole in string fit.
Okay. All right, very cool. Hey man, that's why I love doing this show. I learned stuff you would never. Who the heck would know this? Now I know it, and I learned it here. Good stuff, Greg. Let's talk. I'm sorry I took you off down that rabbit hole, but let's talk Rocky Linux a little bit. So, it's found an audience, right? Some major cloud vendors are now offering it. Why don't you share with the audience a little bit?
Absolutely. So the uptake of Rocky Linux has been just miraculous. It's been amazing. About 2 months after I announced the project, our Slack grew to about 10,000 people, and just trying to manage the messages coming in through Slack. If anyone's used to Slack on a free tier, they only support 10,000 messages in queue. So I would actually get messages coming to me. I'd see the notification, and by the time I scrolled to it and got to it, it was already deleted by Slack because we had so much activity. And we've been constantly just growing and constantly building up. It took us about 7 months to get the operating system released from the moment I announced it. And from that point, we've had an uptake of at least 250,000 downloads per month. And in many months, significantly higher than that, like when we have releases and point releases and whatnot. But generally, it's at least about 250,000 a month.
That's great.
We're seeing uptake from all of the clouds. I just read an analyst report that basically said 1 out of every 5 surveyed respondents are already running Rocky Linux within their infrastructure. 1 out of 5 enterprises is already running it, and it's not even a year old yet. So we're seeing massive amounts of uptake.
What do you attribute that to, though, Greg?
Well, we solved a big pain point. When CentOS went away, CentOS is one of the most highly utilized enterprise operating systems in the world. And so creating an operating system that is designed to be compatible, designed to be an easy migration, and designed to have all of the same kind of values and tenets as CentOS did, but also learning from the CentOS project, right? Learning from what worked well in the early days versus what could have been improved, and then leveraging that to make sure that we're creating Rocky in such a way that brings that value to the project. We had all the cloud vendors that I'm aware of join the project very, very early on. AWS, Google, Azure, Oracle, Naver Cloud, VMware, all of these organizations are part of Rocky Linux at this point. And part of that is because of how we set up the project. We set it up outside of CIQ. Initially, we thought we were going to do it inside of CIQ and make it, a project of the company. But it became very clear early on that would not be doing a good service to the community by doing that. And something I've learned along the way is making a stable open source project is not about putting, a big successful company behind that open source project. It's about having a lot of companies behind that open source project, a lot of organizations and a lot of individuals from diverse backgrounds.
Absolutely.
That's how to make an open source project stable. So we actually put Rocky outside of CIQ. We created something called the Rocky Enterprise Software Foundation, which now we have, as I mentioned, all of the main cloud vendors as sponsors. We have IHVs as sponsors. We have sponsors that are even unlisted, and people helping us to achieve these goals. We have contributors from all over the community. And it's just been, it's been remarkable in terms of how fast everything has grown. And the last point I'll mention on that is, and to this point, Google just recently announced that they're partnering with CIQ to bring Rocky into Google Cloud as a first-party supported offering by Google. So that's huge.
Congrats. Yeah, no, that is. I don't know how much our audience is fairly technical. They probably do understand. But that puts it on footing with all of the major distros out there. That's fantastic. Hey, Greg, we're about out of time because we got off to a late start today. I apologize. But you know what? This is a great story. I'd love to continue keeping our audience appraised of progress with Rocky as well as Fuzzball. And what's happening. We invite you back on anytime you'd like to come. Just reach out. We do this 3 days a week, and what an interesting story, both you personally as well as the whole CIQ and Rocky Linux story. Congratulations on your success, and we wish you more of it going forward.
Thank you so much, Alan. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to it.
All righty. Gregory Kurtzer here from CIQ, folks behind CentOS as well as CentOS, as well as Rocky Linux now, as well as high performance computing, Fuzzball, and other projects. We're going to take a break. We're going to be right back.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond, CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and Media Ops CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
All right, we are back. Next up, we've got the Haunted Hacker Podcast. Mike Jones is the host of this one, as always, and this is part one of a two-part conversation that Mike has with Alex Berta, who provides threat intelligence, cybersecurity, and incident response services. They talk about a number of very serious topics, including the darker side of the internet and the risk to children. They also discuss how volatile and toxic social media can be for kids. Alex also shares some of his intelligence gathering stories, and then they also talk about fun with 3D printing. Good stuff. It's a great conversation. As always, Mike has such interesting conversations with his guests. And like I said before, this is part one of a two-part conversation. So let's go ahead and roll it now.
Welcome to the Haunted Hacker Podcast, May version 1, episode 1. Today we have Alex Berta on, who is pretty awesome, has a really awesome background. I won't steal his thunder. I'll let him talk about it. To start off with a little bit of news, I'll be speaking in Africa at the end of the month for Cyber Starters conferences. You can find them at cybersecurityconference.com, I believe, or cybersecuritystartersconference.com. Also, I will be speaking in Cyprus, I believe, next month or the month after. I just got the deal from them. And ICE again in October. They saved me for their Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So that should be truly interesting, considering the U.S. government hasn't had a whole lot to do with me in the past couple of years. So with that being said, I don't have any other news. So without further ado, Mr. Berta, take it away and tell us about who you are.
Hi, so I'm Alex Berta. I've worked in information security for over the last 20 years. I've done everything from teaching, working in CTI, vulnerability intelligence, doing attack and pen with different agencies and government entities all across the country. And I one of the things I focus in, this is a little different than a lot of people, but I focus on a lot of dangers of social media for parents and younger kids, identifying and exposing things that pedophiles and threat actors do through social media.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've been on that bandwagon for about a year now. I was actually in a docuseries called Hacker Hunted about gaming and social media and how it affects kids and the type of evil shit that goes on those platforms. And I think it all kind of came to a pinnacle this month when, we've had politicians involved in social media and fights about that, right? And then now you have a billionaire buying one of those platforms. It's no longer a social media platform, a true social media platform. Now it's a political platform. There's no room for kids in that discussion. And the majority of the people on those platforms are under 20 years old. Yeah. So you got to think about the risks. So tell me about the kind of stuff you do to bring awareness to that type of situation.
So that's really interesting. So I did a talk with the military, the U.S. military, and bases all over the world, telling them essentially, if you think about it, military kids are more susceptible to talking to strangers just because we're used to packing up, moving, and then making friends immediately, and then moving in 3 months, and then making friends. I did this all growing up. And that's something I wanted to talk to everybody about in the Army and the Marines and in the Navy, was about that, because these kids, they're connected and they're talking to everybody and they make friends quick, but they got to use their head when they're doing that. So when I first started doing this, I reached out to a lot of organizations and I was like, hey, I want to talk to you about the dangers of social media. And they were like, we don't have any problem with that in our town or schools or city. And I'm like, no, really, it's a really big thing. So one of the things I do to bring awareness to it when I'm doing my talks is I find local news stories within the last week about human trafficking, sex trafficking, all types of stuff. And I show it to them and be like, hey, when I came here, this person said that this wasn't an issue, but let me show you some news headlines that you may not have seen. And they're like, whoa, we had no idea that hotel down the road that rents by the night or by the hour was really an issue. And it's like, no, it's really an issue. So we really, depending on who I'm talking to, are the different talking points, but we've covered everything from human trafficking, sex trafficking, and organ trafficking. A lot of people are like, oh, that doesn't exist. No, it's a very real thing. And I live in the middle Tennessee area, right outside of Nashville. And Nashville is like a hot spot for it, because you can be anywhere in the state in 3 hours from Nashville. And we see people come in, they're here for a little bit, and then they leave. And then the next day, the Amber Alert goes out, and we see that over and over and over again. And a lot of it comes down to the parents of being like, I didn't know who my kid was talking to online. Like, I thought I knew, but I had no idea what these like 30 apps were on their mobile device or tablet.
Right. And that's a big problem. So, I try to do the same thing. I went to the PDE, the Pennsylvania Department of Education Summit in Hershey, Pennsylvania last month, and spoke to a room full of educators. And the things I was showing them were very basic, how to hack a cell phone, what happens when a kid gets hacked in something like Fortnite, kind of things that the kids that I come into contact with are usually the ones coming out of prison. And I usually help them and the probation officer get adjusted and move into like the real world and cybersecurity and all that good stuff. But a lot of these kids start out in the same areas, social media, gaming, all that good stuff. But you'd be surprised, like when you start talking about these things in front of educators, there's just no knowledge there. There's a huge gap there, and they're not sure how to solve that gap. I actually had a CISO during my presentation challenge me and said, I've gotten pen test reports back for the past year or so, and there's been zero findings whatsoever. My network's good. So why should I be concerned? I said, well, for two things. For one, you should probably be concerned about the people you hired to do the pen test, because that's absurd. Second of all, there's no network that's unhackable. And trust me, there's probably a kid sniffing traffic on your school's network right now. And he's like, well, we do most of the things in the cloud. It doesn't matter. It's still connected. You're still getting access to those apps. They're finding ways to circumvent protections on those laptops to get to those social media platforms. Kids they're an interesting group, especially the kids now. And I always say, if I had a 10th of the knowledge that these kids have at my age, this conversation wouldn't be happening. I'd either be a billionaire somewhere or in prison, one of the two. But so with the military, tell me about the military, because when I guess it was about 15 years ago, maybe less, Tom Ryan, a good friend of mine, did a research project called Robin Sage, where he created a social media profile of a female that was a intelligence analyst and hit all the major social media platforms, LinkedIn, whatnot, befriended people in the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I mean, it was pretty massive. And it was kind of a lesson to them that, look, this is what social media is. And this is how we found where, first mech was deployed in Iraq or wherever, based on photos and exit data and all that good stuff. So tell me your approach to the military in comparison to your approach with schools and children and stuff like that.
So my approach with the military is I'm very raw. Like, that's, if you're going to be raw with an audience and show them everything and anything, those are the people to do it with. And with them, I kind of did the same thing. I create two profiles. I create a young girl and a young boy, and I have them sign up for the same social media platforms, and I'll post a little bit on them, but not a whole lot. And then I'll show them the comments that come in. The young girl, like the things that are said to her by people that are over the age of 18 is like 100% horrible. The young boy that I create, like, a lot of it's like, hey, younger people, like, let's hang out. But then, you get them into some of those groups with adults, the tone changes really quick. Because a lot of people think, like, oh, I have a young boy, that's not going to happen to him. And that's the message I get all the time. And then I explain to them, like, no, this is what's going to happen to that child, like boy or girl. And I go into really like deep detail with it. And I can do that with the Army. I also show them like subliminal message videos that are out there, like on YouTube Kids and stuff. These videos promote like suicide by taking your parents' happy pills. Like if you're feeling sad, go in your parents' cabinet and take their happy pills, but you take like the whole bottle. And it's a video of this kid like taking a whole bottle of pain medicine and downing it, or, if your mommy and daddy are upset, like pick your favorite one and kind of like take out the other one type deal. And these are, and like listening to these videos, they sound like children's videos, right? Like something off Sesame Street. But the imagery that they're showing them is not Sesame Street. It's not puppets. It's very graphic in detail.
So have you watched Looney Tunes recently as an adult? They're not very, I mean, there's a lot of subliminal stuff in there that watching as an adult, you see like the war references, the different types of like political agendas and all kinds of things from Looney Tunes. It's pretty hardcore.
Since the dawn of cartoons, though, the government and other entities have used that platform or that vehicle to start educating kids at a young age. I remember like that. There was a public service announcement. It's called First Things First or something like that when we were kids. But recently I had to give a history lesson to somebody I met about Disney and Walt Disney and the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, Mishka Mushka, Mickey Mouse. And I explained to him that back in the early days of Disney, there was a problem with communism inside of Disney. And there was rumors that, Walt himself was a communist. Well, if you watch Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, of course, you see Donald Duck in a Russian sailor's outfit. They're speaking Russian in the very beginning. And people, they thought that was just part of the song. Like literally that was the theme song. And I'm like, you really need to pay attention to what your kids are watching. Right. Especially the videos that you're talking about, Alex. A lot of the gaming videos that I see on YouTube, same thing. It messages to kids.
Oh, yeah. One of the things that we had an issue with, like in the 2010 era, when we were really in like the war of terrorism, we were having kids like go on to like Call of Duty and Battlefield and every other games, and they were actually being reached out to by extremists that were playing the games to use for intelligence collection, and the kids like don't know any better. Like if I was a kid and you asked me what my dad did in the military, like I'm going to tell you because I think it's really cool. As an adult, I am not going to tell you what he did in the military. And these kids were just like handing over info left and right, and they were being used for intelligence collection. And there had been reported cases, a couple of them, of young girls that were convinced to go overseas, and they became jihad brides, and then they were sold off in slavery. And those people that they're talking to are very convincing when they're talking to you. They know what to say, they know what to show you, and we still see that even today, even if it's not extremists. These are a different type of extremists that we're dealing with, whether it might be some family annihilator online that like is wanting, some child just to hurt their family one way or another, or if it's, some challenge that we're seeing, being posted on social media that can result, like we saw one with ice where the kids would put ice on their skin and they would try to hold it as long as they could. But there were other things like they amplify it being cold, apply salt or whatever to it. And they were getting burns on their skin from the cold temperatures.
Yeah, that's crazy. And it's sad because, we've gotten into a habit, our generation's gotten into a habit of babysitting kids with electronics. And that's my biggest gripe and biggest complaint. When I see a 2-year-old with an iPad, and he knows exactly where to go and what to click on and how to play it, that's a problem. At 2 years old, they should be learning how to walk and how to talk and all the good little people stuff. But we're throwing them into an adult world from the time they're able to click on something. And it's sad. And there's no repercussions. The social media platforms, if you email them with a complaint or you report somebody, I cannot think of a single time that I have filled out a report that something's been done. And we're talking about defending kids, kids getting a message in their inbox, and me reaching out to the social media platform saying, hey, this is not acceptable. And they do nothing about it. It's because it's become a business and a political platform. And once something on the internet reaches that level, we no longer have control over what goes on that platform. And the platform no longer cares about what's going on either, because they're dealing with bigger fish now. But social media is so bad for everybody. When I watch, people living on their phones, I always step back from social media and kind of like sit on the fringe or sit on the fence and just kind of watch from outsiders in perspective. And the amount of sickness and cancer that flows through social media is just disgusting, especially Twitter. I'm glad that Elon Musk grabbed Twitter. Maybe we'll get a different view, maybe not, who knows? Or it may just turn into Republican light, who knows? But I don't think it's safe for kids under 18 to be on social media. That's my point of view.
No, I mean, I agree. It's very damaging, especially like if you remember, like when we were kids online, like in the early 90s, like we had flame wars, right? Like kids would not be able to survive that today. I mean, we were very cutthroat online and very like personal attacks, and you know you don't see that online now. But you know, yeah, they can't. Yeah, kids don't need that. And especially younger kids. And to answer your question about schools, like when I go to schools, I get a lot of laughter and a lot of kids that think this is funny, or, you know, they won't put their phone down for 5 seconds to see what I'm talking about. So those kids that do that, they become my subjects that I aim every single question at them. And I had this one kid, he was dying laughing the whole entire time I was giving this talk. Oh, this isn't going to happen to me. This isn't going to happen to me. And I'm like, okay, cool. I was like, let me tell you about a kid that said this wasn't going to happen to me either. And it's a really sad story. It took place here in Tennessee. A boy sent a text message to another boy saying that he liked him. And they're in middle school. And of course, you know, this other kid took that screenshot and he shared it throughout the school. And the young man that sent that, he ended up taking his own life. Like we're talking hours like after it was sent, because all the messages that, you know, came to him. In his mind, he probably thought nothing bad is going to come of this if I share it out. But, you know, police showed up to his house. They arrested him. You know, there's repercussions for things. And when I explained that to him and I went into detail about it, and into, you know, as much detail as I could that school would let me, about what these people would do to a child, or the different groups that I see on social media where they're doing child swapping and things like that, that his attitude completely changed. Because I told him, I was like, you're the target range that they want. I was like, you're a young male, you're athletic, like, you know, they're going to go after you, you know, if they wanted to. And after that, all the teachers were like, yeah, we never thought about that. And I was like,
yeah, you brought up a couple of things. Like I talk about this all the time. We have this bad, I don't know if it's just the United States, but I feel kind of like because of social media, it's kind of generalized that it doesn't matter until it happens to me attitude. Like, oh, that's never going to happen to me. But when it does, it's like, oh my God, why didn't you stop this? Like, we have to get that mentality. But there's also that side of like where it can slip over. Part of the reason, perhaps there's 2 reasons, I think. One, there are studies that have shown that like the electronics and the games and all of these different things act as like they have an opioid-like effect. They're very addictive, you know. So there's been, you know, retreats for kids to go out into the woods. Like their parents send them off. They're like, you're addicted to, you know, technology, but like that's not feasible for everyone. So we've got to find a way. And you know, the other is like we've got to kind of stop it being so fear-based. Like, yes, this may not happen to you, but if it did, these are some things that you can kind of just look out for instead of being like, okay, but what if it happened to your friend? Like, you know, think about like how to relate it and not so much of a fear base to them. Cause I mean, it's to me in a way, not the examples that you said, but like, if we're so focused on the worst case scenario, like it doesn't have to be that bad, but like, what if somebody, you know, like you don't understand the repercussions that it could intend to? It doesn't always have to be worst case scenario. You know, think about it, you know, so those are a couple of things that like, it is a problem. How do we get to the kids? They're not paying attention a lot of times. They're like, yeah, whatever. But I mean, you bring up really good points. Like you have to kind of delve in, but you can't do that one-on-one. And we need the parents to do it. How do we get to them?
Well, right? It needs to be a government push, I think. I know over in Europe, especially the UK, and the NCA, the National Crime Agency, really pushes on a national level, that type of information and campaigns. But when was the last time you woke up on a Saturday morning, turned on the TV, and saw a PSA like we used to see when we were kids? It's been eons since I've seen any kind of public service announcement geared towards kids about anything. And it's almost as if that whole generation has been lost because we handed them a cell phone and an iPad. We're done. Now we move on to the next generation and fucked them up too, I guess. I don't know. But it seems like that whole generation, once Gen X, became parents, it was like, we no longer have time for this over here. So I'm going to hand you an iPad. If you sit over there and be quiet, I don't care what you do. I'm not even going to look, but babysit yourself. And I think that mentality, the family unit within the U.S. and the social constructs that we have, I think the family unit itself has been damaged over the past 20 years. And there's not so much as a unit as there is separate pieces of it. And the kids are paying the biggest price. One kid that I worked with just recently, he had gotten hacked, and I looked at what had been going on. He took me through it and talked me through it. And it all had to do with gaming, but they met on Discord, and they were playing Fortnite together. And hey, kid, here's a file. Why don't you take a look at this file? I'm building this new map for the game. So what does he do? He obviously clicks on it. Next thing you know, all his accounts are hijacked. And it's like, this is happening to kids from adults all the time. Now imagine that same situation, but let's say it's their cell phone, right? An APK, the kid downloads a game, he thinks it's a game. And next thing you know, his geolocation is given away every 10 seconds, microphone, webcam, all the good stuff, right? This happens daily. But parents, most people I talk to have no clue. They think the biggest danger their kid is facing is their laptop getting hacked while they're playing a game. And I'm like, you're not even taking into consideration all the physical harm that can be done, plus all the harm to your family. Like, you're saying it's just your kid and it's just a laptop, but shouldn't those two things be really important in the whole scheme of things?
Yeah, I worked a sextortion case that was around gaming, where a guy was giving this other young boy, gift cards, like the V-Bucks and all this stuff. And whenever he would ask for something in exchange, the kid would do it. And at first it was like small things, like, hey, like, be on at this time to play with me. And it'd be like middle of the night, when he wasn't supposed to be on. And what he was doing is he was grooming him. Mm-hmm. And then from there, it like escalated. Hey, send me some pictures on Discord, or get on Wicker or Signal. Send me photos. And so the kid, he did. He didn't know any better. Nobody has ever told him no. And then from there, it like escalated, and the guy kept asking for more and more from this child. And it got to the point where, hey, I'm uncomfortable with sending you a video or whatever. Right. Well, if you don't send me a video, I'm going to take these photos. I'm going to send them to your parents and your school. So he was leveraging that, which is classic sextortion. But we see this all the time around gaming, because, if I were to offer you a $50 gift card, no strings attached, you're going to take it as a kid, but there's always strings attached. These people that are like grooming these kids online, they know what they're doing. They're master manipulators. Like they're going to get what they want in the end. We got lucky with this because the parents noticed that this child was starting to act weird, started not doing well in school, like just stress and anxiety. Like every time he would get on and play a game, like they said, you could just see like he didn't want to, even though he wanted to play the game. Wow. And so they got a hold of his mobile device and they found out, and then the authorities, were notified. And like this guy, just like the conversation, it was, let's be buddy. And then, if you don't do what I say, like this is going to happen, like, threatening, like an 11-year-old, you don't do that.
No. And that's pretty commonplace.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And it happens. I have people all the time message me on Discord, and like some of the things that people say, like when I'm gaming or whatever, cause I'll just like throw my Discord name out there. Like, hey, shoot me a message. Like I'm interested to see who's actually going to do it. Right. But it's like these people our age, like, you know, hey, how old are you? You know, and I'm like, oh, I'm 13. Like, let's have this conversation.
Right.
And because I want to see what tactics they're using. So when I go educate my people, I can say, hey, they moved from this to this. And it seems like those communities of like the, you know, attackers, they all talk with each other. Like, we've seen it on social media. I worked I didn't work, I found and ended up kind of working it, but a child swap group, and right on Facebook. And just like you said, you know, I reported it so many times and they did absolutely nothing. But for those that don't know what a child swap group is, say I have a kid and Kim has a kid and they're both about the same age. We swap kids for the day. Whatever happens, happens.
Whoa.
And it was on Facebook. Like, it's one of the things I talk about in my talk, and they would share pictures and videos and, you know, different things. And then, you know, of course there were like some onion links on there. Like, if you wanted to go talk in private, right, you would go there, but a lot of people didn't. They talked right there on Facebook about whatever they were going to do. And I had brought this up many times to law enforcement, federal, Facebook, you know, like everybody. And they were just like, what do you want us to do? Like, and I'm like, do your job.
Shut my shit down.
Yeah, go after it. And it took some convincing, and the group ended up getting shut down. But what did they do? They just spun another one up with the same name, put a number 2 behind it. A couple days later, it has 800 people following it. You know?
Yeah, I got the response from law enforcement at one point. We were doing a crackdown on pedophiles, and the group I was with, we outed thousands of them. And the response that we got from law enforcement was, don't do that, because if you do, you're ruining probably an active investigation. And I was like, bro, these people have been on here forever.
Yeah.
Every day that goes by, there's another kid that's a victim. So if you're not going to do it, we will, and we'll do it for free. But they didn't like to answer because it damaged their investigations. Now, I get that, I understand that. But being a parent and having a kid and knowing what goes on as time goes by to the poor kids that are locked into that situation, the fact that you're ruining investigations shouldn't even be a concern. It should be, let's go take care of this problem. You know, we have a bunch of amateurs that are able to shut down 2,000 pedophile profiles, but the local police department can't pull in 10. It's just, it seems like, I don't know if it's the red tape or if it's that these guys have gotten so good that they found a way to operate within the loopholes or the fabric of the law. Because that's a lot of what I find. You know, the same people who used to be the flamers when we were kids, they've grown up and they're still the same people. So I've dealt with some of that stuff in the wake of becoming a podcast host and all this stuff. But what I found is those people don't change. And unless they do something about what's going on now with kids, guess what? We're going to have a shitload of adults coming with the same problems, with the same attitudes, doing the same shit.
Well, that kind of brings up, I was thinking of that, like when Alex, you were talking about like the parents, you know, like don't really notice, or both of you guys were talking about that. Like, and part of it is they don't care either. Right. So, I mean, I don't know how many people I talk to that are our age and even younger. I mean, you don't have to be more than 20, like, to have a kid. So like if that 20-year-old is playing games the entire time that kid is born and doesn't care about any kind of security or learning anything, they're getting just the same thing. It's not just kids, it's the adults too. I mean, they're getting their life savings stolen. It's not just like, I'm going to say on a happier note, let's talk about bank fraud, but like, but it's true. Like these adults it's not just adults to kids, it's adults to adults, and the adults right now don't care. Like there's a systemic problem that we have, like, again, and part of it goes back to, it doesn't matter until it happens to me. Well, it's too late. Just how do we get the education out there? And Mike, you've brought this up before, and about like, this should be in school. We've all talked about this should be from like kindergarten, pre-K. They're coming like from the very beginning talking about this. This should be part of, you know, educational courses, you know, and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, instead of all the craziness that they fight over in school, like who can wear what shirt and all that good stuff, they should be teaching this shit. Like this is what you need to be careful of. But it's probably not going to happen in our lifetime. And the reason why I say that is because our parents got shocked with the amount of innovation and progress in technology in such a short amount of time. And so when you look at parents and those parents that have young kids, that same shock in technology is there, because now the kids have all these multi-platform games. They have the ability to talk, to neighbors or to whoever across the world in a matter of seconds. When we were kids, we didn't have that yet. That wasn't mainstream. So that technology gap, one thing I've had to do, like working with law enforcement overseas, is sit down and talk to the parents and find out what kind of technology they have in the house, what kind of technology the kids have. So what are some of the things to look at or look for if you think something's going on? Where to go to look to find those log files, where to go to look to find those connections and whatnot. Because parents just don't know. They go to work and they come home, they have a Wi-Fi router sitting in the house, but give me 10 people out of 100 that knows how to access that don't work in cyber, and I'll give you $100 myself. Like, it just does not happen. And even some people in cyber have had to help them set up their routers. Like, is this a real question?
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
All right, we are back. Next up, we've got the Something Old segment. This is from the recent Secure Software Summit. This features Mark Wireman, who is a senior manager at Accenture, and his presentation is titled Security and Compliance One and the Same, talking about ways in which organizations can have effective cybersecurity and compliance all in the same vein. And it is all about governance, folks. And Mark parses the whole thing out for us with a lot of takeaways in this presentation. So let's go ahead and roll it now.
Hello, my name is Mark Wireman, Senior Manager at Accenture, and I'm going to talk today about security and compliance and how they're one and the same within DevSecOps. So many of you should be familiar, hopefully, with this symbol by this point in time in your career. And it's quite a familiar symbol for many of us, especially those of us that have been in the IT industry, that includes development, operations, security, and all things that are encompassing IT, where this infinity symbol or system of DevSecOps is quite familiar. Where it starts to get a little bit fuzzy, and many of you have probably experienced this, is when it gets fuzzy and starts to lose a little bit of familiarity, is when it make its way outside of to the other parts of the organization. And what I'm talking about specifically is when you get into the C-suite. The vision and view and perception of DevOps is a little different. When we talk about audit and compliance, we talk about business, talk about risk management, risk mitigation, et cetera. Those parts of the business tend to see this as a little bit of a fuzzy area that they don't quite understand or have a concept or grasp around. And that's because too many of those those other parts of the organization really see DevOps equating to Agile. So whenever you say DevOps, the first thing they typically say, at least in my experience, is Agile. We all kind of cringe when we hear that, right? Because that's really a misconception where Agile is a way to push changes and new products faster with processes and methodologies without all of that other stuff that tends to get in the way, again, from their perception that Agile makes things faster, leaner, go into production without all of the other what are considered roadblocks to be in a way. It says the misconception that DevOps automatically brings security, compliance, audit, and risk management. We also see that as a very common misperception, and it's far too often prevalent in the industry. And quite frankly, it's been quite costly in the industry, with hackers being able to take advantage of sort of this imbalance between the need to move faster without considering security and compliance. We've seen the prevalence of attacks. We've seen the severity of these attacks hit the industry by storm. This is not surprising, right? Given that the evolution of DevOps really has a long, tumultuous history that goes all the way back to the 1950s. How do you ask? Well, simply, since the advent of computing systems, there have been software that's been developed to run on and support these systems. And operations have been there along the way to support and maintain the systems. And what's ironic about that is in the early days, you actually had dev and ops working together. In often cases, they were one and the same, or they would work in collaboration within a room. You'd have a specialty, but they would all come together with the same common goal. So we've gone from 1950s and 60s to where they work together to now they're sort of working in disparate cycles. So as systems become, and over the years since the 1950s, since these systems have become more prevalent in our lives, from finance to health to automotive to the next generation thing, this now has highlighted the need for security, compliance, and other things to really protect this organizations and the customers from compromise. And because of these processes have seen the evolution through the years being brought in as more manual, it gives the appearance that if you simply flip the switch and bring on this new methodology called DevOps, that this automatically is going to transition as part of that journey because it's perceived as being automatically embedded as part of it. Again, that misconception of what this really means. So what DevOps really brings, right, is a new paradigm in how software is developed, in how systems are developed, in how operations work. And now it's in how security has to come along the way as part of a partner between security, compliance, operations, and dev to really help bring that part of the important aspect to your development, testing, and deployment of systems. So what does this DevOps thing really mean? Well, it's a little confusing if you were to look out across the landscape and try and get an understanding of what DevOps really means, right? You have all of these different symbols. You have DevOps, DevSecOps, SecDevOps, DevOpsSec, DevXOps. So the industry has seen this explosion in the overuse in the word and the term of DevSecOps or DevOps. Well, really, and if you boil it down, it's really just bringing Dev plus Sec plus Ops together in a way that we have not seen before, in that supports automation and push out to production faster, leaner, quicker, and more securely. So when we boil it down, when you look at DevOps, well, that really means Dev and Ops coming together as a continuous function. When you look at DevSecOps or SecDevOps or DevOpsSec, it's really saying we're going to come together in a continuous function for Dev plus Sec plus Ops. But then you see this DevXOps. What is that? What does that mean? Well, that's just yet another iteration to bring something together. And not only bring something together, we're starting to see this now explode towards ML ops, which means machine learning ops. We see it in AI ops, artificial intelligence ops. We see it in data ops. That's where you're bringing your data assets into operations. But fundamentally, it's still Dev, Sec, ops, because no matter what X you put there, you have to secure it. You have to make sure it adheres to compliance. You have to develop a solution around it, and you have to maintain and support it. So far too often, instead of DevOps like shift to automation as a rule and manual as an exception, the one symbol and name that I always like to see, and I've heard this in other parts, in other speech, other podcasts and other presentations, is with DevFollops. This is where many organizations are still bringing in that heavyweight manual waterfall processes for security, compliance, risk, and change management in an attempt to overlay in a DevOps way through the lens of Agile, only to end up with roadblocks, confusion, and still operating like an analog process in a very digital world. Hence the growing number of the various iterations of what we're seeing of Dev plus Sec plus Ops in the industry. So with all this name saturation that's going on, where security fits into DevOps, or maybe it doesn't fit into DevOps, or maybe it fits into there in either the end or maybe in the middle, or maybe at will, let's step back to the days before DevOps and look at the fundamental of what is used to identify risks within the SDLC and operations. So today, every organization typically asks, does the system function without error and without slowing down release to production? However, that is a fundamentally flawed question to ask. Why is that? Because they should be asking the question of not only does it function without error, does it function in a way it's supposed to and operate with acceptable and traceable risk? So when you look at how this process in its fundamental aspect, fundamental core is supposed to work, it's very simple. It's a three-pronged process. It's risk assessment, evaluation, identification, risk mitigation. What feeds into the risk assessment? Well, you need your guidelines, you need your policies, you need your frameworks, you need your compliance requirements, compliance and regulatory requirements, because those help in establishing the gaps that need to be identified as you make your way through the process. It also helps to, as you get into your risk assessment, it also helps to identify the what and the how from a review perspective. And I like to use this example. A web application that manages, views, processes health information is not the same application that simply serves PDF files of marketing material. Those are fundamentally different applications. Yet in the DevOps way of life and the way that it's done today, those two applications are treated the same criticality level, which means they undergo the same rigorous process of assessment, which brings and bears frustration to the organization. That's where that risk assessment helps establish the criteria of what do we really need to drive to get to that acceptable and traceable risk that gives us the comfort level of knowing that that application is going out to production in a safe and secure way. Evaluation identification. So taking that risk assessment, the process to identify those gaps, what needs to be identified, and making sure we're running those evaluation identification criteria appropriately. Do I need to do a SAST? Do I need to do a DAST? Do I need to do a pen test? What policies, procedures, compliance requirements do I need to bring in for my configuration of my infrastructure as component, the infrastructure as code components? What are my coding standards? What kind of training do I need to do? Those are all aspects that come into the evaluation identification. And by the way, these can be done automatically, right? Risk mitigation. Now that I've identified it, evaluated, identified it, how do I then mitigate it? If I have a high vulnerability, I need to mitigate it in this time period. If I have medium, I need to mitigate it in this time period. If I have critical, I probably want to do it right away. So those help establish those things. Also from a compliance perspective, because we don't think about this when we talk about the rating, but what compliance aspects that are coming out of this that get evaluated and identified, can I go ahead and release now or something that I need to fix. And all of this, so the categories are actually the controls that come in to support this decision making and how ultimately I want to mitigate these risks. So it's as simple and as hard as what you see here. What are some of the challenges? Well, we've all know people and change management are the number one challenge, right? You're basically telling people how to do their job and they don't like that, right? And you're forcing these people to play in the same sandbox. They don't like to share their Tonka toys, right? They like to play with in their own sandbox with their own version of their Tonka toys. Well, DevOps is saying, no, we got to break that silo down. We got to come together. There's a lot of advantages to doing that. We just got to get better in helping them with that. Development is still going back to the 1960s up until today. Development still feels the pressure to get out into production quick. Business says, I got to get this out there. If I don't, I'm going to lose $5 million. So there's still this huge need to release quickly. There's still also a little bit of a separation, and we'll see that in the slide in a little bit, of where the separation still exists today. And there's still this challenge to measure the ability to meet project exit criteria. So what is it ultimately that I, as a developer, what's my goalpost so that I can make sure I'm meeting that goalpost, and how can it be effectively measured so I know that I'm attaining that goalpost before I get there? That's a huge challenge in DevOps. Products are doing better. They're still lagging behind in being able to change in supporting this new modern development methodology. Throwing a dashboard out there is not an answer. There's on average, and I can't remember the name of the study, there was a study that was done that for each DevOps iteration within an organization, there's on average 12 different dashboards. That is not going to scale. We've got to get better at consolidating this information. Also, the products themselves haven't scaled in a way that DevOps scales. You still have this enterprise behemoth product that you need to install within your organization that has this massive server, has these other dependent components, it has this license server that has all this other stuff. That's difficult to scale in DevOps. They're getting better, but they're not quite there yet. There's also poor integration, right? They're still siloed. Thou shalt do this, thou shalt do that, but thou shalt never talk to each other. They've got to start communicating. Again, get back to the ability to measure and provide those goalposts for the developers. Security and compliance still seen today as a rubber stamp function. We've got to change that. We've got to get security and compliance integrated. Security and compliance has to have a complete mind shift and paradigm shift in the way that they take their analog solutions or analog way of life and morph it over to a digital way of working. We can't have spreadsheets that go down and do a check and take screen shares and verify and validate you have this information. Even reports, if you generate a report, that's great, but you got to be able to put some kind of automation around it that scans that report, provides a feedback to the respective parts of the organization to then make a quick decision on without having to set up a meeting and go through those reports. And then operations, it's a whole new paradigm for operations because a lot of things now are code. Infrastructure is code, cloud assets, everything's virtual. They don't have these big servers with these knobs and switches and cables to plug in anymore. They now have to deal with these virtual assets, and that's a whole different way of thinking. So how do you maintain version of those assets? How do you learn how to write code? How do you learn how to push that code through a development methodology? That's where, again, a lot of this mindset has to start coming together, and that's where all of these groups need to come together to deal with these challenges within DevOps and bring compliance and security as part of that journey. So speaking of that, so how do we transform it? Well, governance really drives the transformation of behavior within DevOps. And I like to use this way of visual to show that you have governance that provides that critical starting point that will then educate and enable the people, which would then you can use to establish those processes to make sure that those people are staying within that respective guardrails. And you can use the technologies then to drive the processes and make it completely seamless for the way that the people do and manage and handle security and compliance within DevOps. Far too often, we see them start with technology. Technology is the worst place to start. Technology will only get you to a worse situation quicker. If you don't know where you're starting, you're just exasperating the problem when you put technology. Companies will have technologies they paid $5, $6, $7 million for. They're only using 10% of this capability. The rest of it's just sitting on the shelf, becoming dustware. So this is DevSecOps really brings the need to understand your governance, your compliance, your risk, those processes, which can then filter down and make it a very seamless, integrated, embedded solution that developers don't even have to worry about. Operations don't even have to worry about. But again, you have to drive with governance and not technology. So what does this really look like? Well, a busy slide, but you can see that the concepts are digital transformation, being secure and compliant, increase visibility, reduce the cycle time. These are the elements. We want to bring patterns, anti-patterns, security as guardrails, guiding principles, all of these components that help drive that, right? So here's your governance. Here's your elements as part of your governance, which feeds into your process. And then here's your activities, right? So as part of these activities, these things are ongoing, right? From the couple of previous slides back, you want this to be iterative and continuous at each step, depending on the need, right? So this is really ultimately where we want to drive and really help organizations embed compliance and security within their DevOps methodology. Again, it's as easy and as hard as that, right? This here is probably one of my favorite slides because it really lays it out. You see the continuum here. We talk about DevSecOps, SDLC, and continuous security and compliance. So when you talk about DevOps, you're talking about continuous. From continuous security, governance, and compliance, all the way to continuous and build. And when I mentioned earlier, developers are still driving DevOps, and they're still leading DevOps, that is because greater than 80% of the organizations, when they say they're doing DevOps, and this is supported by tons of research, greater than 80%, when they say they're doing DevOps, they're really doing continuous build. And then it starts decreasing in percentage as you work your way up. Fewer are doing continuous integration plus continuous build. Fewer are doing continuous delivery plus continuous integration plus continuous build, so on and so forth, all the way up to less than 10%, and I would even argue less than 5%, have any components or aspects of a continuous security and governance compliance. And very few organizations, if any, are doing what I call a pre-plan phase. You'll never see a pre-plan in any literature, because this to me is one of the most important fundamental aspects of making sure you get continuous security, governance, and compliance within your DevOps process, program. This is where you start laying out, from a transformational perspective, the what and the how from a governance standpoint. Once you have that, then you can move into the other parts of your SDLC, your plan, your develop, your build, your test, right? So your pre-plan encompasses the continuous security, governance, and compliance. Your plan falls into operations, deployment, delivery. Develop falls into integration and build. And of course, build, test, release, well, you can follow it throughout, but that's the concept here. One of the other things that are very important, and you don't see this very often, is you have to have a way and a process and a model that captures those vulnerabilities and deals with the mitigation. It's answering that question, now what? It's great you can find issues. It's great pen testers can go out and find a vulnerability and report it, but what are you going to do with it? It's great that a SaaS product can go out and find it. What are you going to do with it? It's great you can go find compliance issues, but what are you going to do with it? So that's where your vulnerability management process comes in. This here, to me, is really all encompassing in what we should be striving towards with a DevSecOps program where security and compliance are an embedded part of that, and they're one and the same. When you overlay it from a delivery model perspective, again, keeping with that continuous flow, continuous cycle, continuous mindset, here's where those pillars fall in. And again, you see continuous security and compliance is an integral part of that. And these are some of the representative examples of that. So security and compliance is a journey in DevSecOps. So when you look at the overlay of DevSecOps and you look at it from a journey perspective, this is really what we see typically when organizations go through this transformation. Over on the left, that's where you have a lot of your ad hoc and on-demand capabilities. So you have yearly demands, you have quarterly requirements, and you may have some inconsistencies in the way that some of these things are actually adopted as part of your agile DevSecOps processes. Then you can move towards automation, right? So as you're shifting and moving further into the automated processes, now you're looking at bringing these things and automating some of these capabilities, right? This is where now you start bringing in that governance aspect, really important, right? So you have your governance, management, and compliance that are brought in as part of this. You have security that's an integral part of this process, right? And then you have your on-demand services. So those are your simulations, those are your policy and compliance requirements, because those things change. So you got to have them on demand. They have to constantly be feeding into your process. And then you move towards faster remediation, right? So then you can start looking at other things like self-healing code, integrated SOC, all of those other components, right? But really fundamentally, you want to get towards this automated continuous security and compliance component as part of that transformation in on-demand services and capabilities to support the integration and embedding of security and compliance as a fundamental function within your DevSecOps journey. How we get there? Well, I say you have to have a COE, right? Some people call it a DevSecOps Center of Excellence model. Some people call it a Center of Enablement model. However you want to phrase it, it's fundamentally you have to get there using the right level of oversight, governance, architecture, and operational execution. And one of the most important aspects of this is you have to have that cross-functional leadership in management, because that is what's going to drive the human capital changes within that organization. If you don't have that cross-functional leadership, you're going to do a bottom-up drive versus a top-down push. And that's going to leave back to what we talked about, that the developers are going to be the ones driving it. And 80% of your DevOps transformation is going to be considered within that CI realm. And you're still going to do the rest of it, either ad hoc or manual. So it's really important to get this. So the culture and learning and the measurement as well. So being able to provide that feedback up and down the stack so that you can give that full level transparency and perspective around what's happening as I'm transforming, and including compliance and security in that journey, right? That's where your guardrails and technologies come in. It's where your policies and processes come in. Now, what does it look like from an agile perspective? Because we can't talk about DevOps without talking about agile. I know I kind of beat up a little bit on agile earlier, but agile really drives and provides that project management oversight capability, provides the processes and the methodology, right? Where DevOps is the execution from an automation perspective. So when you lay it out from an agile perspective, here's where all these activities fit in, right? From planning all the way to maintenance, gate checks, et cetera. But you can see it's still an iterative part of this process. You still need to include security and compliance as part of that journey. And you have to have those checks and balances in there to make sure it is part of that journey. And here's your operational roadmap, right? So when you lay out DevOps from a 2D perspective, two-dimensional point of view, here's some of the real cool things you can do and where to integrate them in as part of this journey. Some of it's going to be automated. Now, the majority of it will be automated. There's still, in reality, there's still going to be some manual processes that are involved in this. However, automation as a general rule, manual as an exception, right? In the manual, remember this, the manual will be determined by what that risk assessment guideline provides. Not everything needs to go through a code review. Not everything needs to go through a security architecture and design. Not everything needs to be pen tested. Not everything needs to have a formal approval for release. Maybe you can have an automated approval. So again, it's using this as a model to drive the behavior and the actions as part of your journey with the overlay of the governance on top of it. That's going to make the determination on which parts of this I'm going to touch, which parts of it I'm going to automate, and which parts do I need to continue to maintain as manual. And with that, I want to thank you for the time. Hopefully this has been a very insightful discussion. Hopefully it's generated some thoughts and new ways of thinking in terms of applying this. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask and I'll try to respond. Thank you.
Hey everybody, happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon and I'm here now with the headlines. First up on DevOps.com, we have an article that looks at how waterfall methodologies can stifle enterprise agility. In this age of sweeping digital transformation and accelerated change, organizations are recognizing that depending solely on the drawn-out process of waterfall methodology is no longer sustainable if they are to remain competitive and relevant. Enterprise infrastructure must incrementally embrace evolution from monolithic architectures in response to the escalating pace of technological innovation, ever-changing consumer needs and demands, and the failure of a long-running single project focus. A continuous architecture design with no end state, guided by iterative changes, will fluidly address the changing needs of the enterprise. A shift from project-oriented to a product-oriented management mindset leads to faster learning cycles, shorter time to market, higher quality, and increased revenues. This article delves into some of the elements that can boost organizations beyond waterfall into agile and beyond to ensure they remain viable players in the wake of digital transformation. And we have the latest from Progress, which has extended its DevSecOps portfolio. It built atop the Chef automation framework it acquired in 2020 to now include the ability to programmatically address compliance mandates. The company also updated the Progress Chef Inspect framework for automating the discovery of compliance issues to add support for SAP ASE, IBM DB2, Mongo, Cassandra, Oracle, Microsoft SQL platforms, along with RHEL, CentOS, Ubuntu, and Mac OS Monterey. Progress has also updated the Progress Chef Automation Stack, a Progress Chef Enterprise Automation Stack, to add the ability to combine infrastructure configuration processing with compliance audits within a single consolidated policy definition, along with a high availability capability that makes certain the platform is always accessible. Progress Chef Cloud Security enables DevOps teams to take advantage of a single policy as code platform to consistently implement compliance policies alongside security controls across both multiple public clouds and on-premises IT environments. Over on Container Journal, we take a look at the top 5 frustrations with debugging Kubernetes. According to the CNCF, 96% of organizations are using or evaluating Kubernetes, which has been fully embraced by large enterprises. The overwhelming success of Kubernetes can be attributed to many factors, but simplicity is not one of the main reasons for adoption, especially not in day 2 operations. Kubernetes has made it easier to deploy large, scalable applications, but managing and troubleshooting Kubernetes can be quite difficult. This article outlines the top 5 frustrations organizations have experienced when debugging Kubernetes and ways in which they can move past the complexity and enjoy the goodness that Kubernetes provides. And Red Hat has added an automatic container rollback capability to the Red Hat Enterprise Linux operating system, along with an image builder service for both creating custom file systems and configuring virtual machines running on cloud platforms. The rollback capability is provided via integration with Podman, an open-source container management tool that can automatically detect if a newly updated container fails to start, and which is now embedded in RHEL 9. Announced at the Red Hat Summit 2022 event last week, Podman integration with RHEL 9 now rolls back a container that fails to start to the previous working version to minimize disruptions to the IT environment. The goal of the rollback capability is to prevent deploying and configuring RHEL from impeding DevOps workflows. By adding these types of capabilities into the operating system, it also becomes easier to manage containers without having to rely on orchestration platforms such as Kubernetes if an IT team so chooses. In many cases, IT teams are building applications using containers without using any orchestration platform. So integration with Podman provides an alternative approach for IT teams to manage the container environment. And over on Security Boulevard, the U.S. Department of State has announced a reward of up to $10 million, that's in U.S., for information leading to the identification or location of key leaders of the Conti ransomware crime group, which has been responsible for hundreds of ransomware incidents over the past 2 years. It also said it would put up an additional $5 million for any information leading to the arrest and or conviction of individuals in any country conspiring to participate in or attempting to participate in a Conti variant ransomware incident. The Conti ransomware group is one of the most well-known and feared ransomware operations around, primarily because of their prolific targeting and ruthless efficiency. Ransomware attacks from Ryuk and Conti have impacted hundreds of healthcare facilities across the United States, including facilities located in 192 cities and 41 states and the District of Columbia. And the FBI has estimated that the Conti ransomware variant is the costliest strain of ransomware ever documented, with more than 1,000 victims of attacks associated with Conti ransomware and an accumulated volume of victim payouts topping $150 million since the start of the year. The State Department itself has paid more than $135 million in rewards to date under the Transactional Organized Crime Rewards Program, which it runs in coordination with other federal law enforcement partners as part of a government effort to tackle organized crime, global organized crime, including cybercrime, and the Narcotics Rewards Program. And finally, Palo Alto Networks has launched ZTNA 2.0, a zero-trust network architecture initiative defined by an ability to apply more granular controls to remote access. The first generation of ZTNA focused mainly on providing secure access with no real regard for limiting access to applications once that access was granted. ZTNA 2.0 represents a generational shift in that a platform can limit access to a specific set of applications rather than the entire enterprise IT environment. ZTNA is achieved by identifying applications at layer 7 independent of network constructs like IP and port numbers. After access is granted using least privilege model, easy for me to say, trust is then continuously assessed based on changes in device posture, user behavior and application behavior, as well as data loss prevention policies that are applied, and network traffic is continuously inspected for threats. Those capabilities can also be applied to not just software as a service and legacy applications running in the data center, but also when granting access to the microservices that make up a modern cloud-native application. Good stuff. All right, that's it for the headlines. Please check back with me on tomorrow, I guess. I'll be back with a brand new batch for you. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day. Please, whatever you do, stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Techstrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with John Anthony, who is the CEO of Conversant Group. John, thank you so much for taking a couple minutes and being with me today. I do appreciate it.
Thank you. It's going to be fun.
All right. So tell me a little bit about Conversant Group.
So Conversant Group is a consultancy based in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Today, we have over 180 clients, though we've worked with probably more than 1,000 organizations. We have namely focused on the practice of law, though we also have a significant sample of governmental entities and other industries covered in our customer portfolio. So we are very well acquainted in high-risk industries, in particular, those that contain very sensitive data. My personal background is in cybersecurity and infrastructure, and so the company was really born out of my passions for both of those things. And so today, that is what we do. We focus on cybersecurity defense and infrastructure, both in the cloud and on-premise, and we do that for all types of industries.
Awesome. That sounds great. So I want to talk to you a little bit about data breaches, if you will, or I guess privacy. Gosh, is it privacy invasion, or just the way that hackers are gaining the personal information of just pretty much about anybody, and they're doing it in kind of a sneaky way, using kind of law enforcement tactics to do so. So what they're doing is using the emergency data requests. So can you kind of walk me through that?
Yeah. So obviously, there's a mechanism for the judicial department of requesting data from ISPs and those other entities that house personalized accounts for individuals, right? So there's a method that's allowed for law enforcement, usually via subpoena, to request data on these accounts, who owns them, and ultimately obtain access to them. And so there's a mechanism called emergency data request, which allows them to, in an emergency, without a subpoena, without a court order, to request access to these accounts. And usually those are leveraged, namely when it's a life or death type situation, when the situation is so severe that it's necessary to avoid normal due process to obtain that requisite access. And so what the threat actors are doing is they're compromising law enforcement email accounts and then making these emergency data requests of ISPs, personal email services, entities that host these personal accounts, and requesting access to them, and also requesting ownership of those ownership information of those accounts. And so basically it's avoiding due process, and in doing so, it's allowing hackers to gain a great deal of private data that they could then leverage for future and further and frankly even deeper and broader attacks. I can actually think of an instance that we worked last year. We have another entity within our Conversant Group family called Phoenix 24, where we actually do breach recovery work. So we get inside these breaches. Actually, one of the largest breaches we worked last year involved personal email account phishing. The threat actors were able to phish the end users that ultimately led to that organization being breached on their personal email accounts. They obtained their passwords.
God, that's kind of scary.
Very scary.
So how common is this? I mean, it's something that I haven't heard of before, but is this becoming more prevalent in the law enforcement space, that you are seeing hackers actually infiltrate the networks and gain data that way?
Yeah, so Charlene, you probably know of a statistic that 94% of all breaches start with an email.
Right.
So it's not shocking, frankly, that the threat actors are targeting law enforcement email. I don't frankly believe this is new. I think what is new is that they have figured out that they can do these emergency data requests. That part, I would argue, is relatively new. targeting law enforcement email accounts is certainly not new. That's been going on for more than a decade. But learning how to leverage our legal process against other private organizations and frankly other individuals, that certainly is new. And I would say that I don't know that I have a good statistic to tell you how frequently this is occurring as of yet, but it certainly has recently occurred as it relates to lapses, which you've probably seen in the media. They were responsible for breaching Okta and also Microsoft. These types of methods were actually part of the methods that they used in their breaches.
Wow. Wow. So, we've been having a conversation kind of on and off for the last 20 years or so now regarding the privacy of personal information and the ability for law enforcement agencies to gain access to information without requiring a subpoena or some sort of court order. And a lot of that has to do with the terrorism attacks and the Patriot Act and whether, there's been that conversation whether law enforcement agencies are kind of overstepping or using the Patriot Act to kind of get access to information that, wiretapping and such, and whether that's actually, as I said, overstepping their range of responsibilities. And I wonder with this emergency data request, certainly there is a need for it, but I wonder if shutting this down might be one avenue that, that we can help kind of close off this open portal, if you will, for hackers and threat actors, and other things such as maybe constraining the Patriot Act and some of the things that they were able to do through the Patriot Act. Whether that might be a way of maybe mitigating this.
Frankly, I wouldn't get so much into the weeds about whether politically it's the right thing to allow or not. I would say, however, if my life were in danger, I would hope that they could leverage the EDR, right? The emergency data request to save my life. So I would just say that I think it's probably necessary in certain use cases without a doubt. I think the core problem is that we do not have public standards and public requirements of police departments and frankly, of any county and local municipalities that are requiring them to properly secure their email. The core problem here is not that we allow EDRs. The problem is that our email systems are not secure. And it is possible to secure them. Frankly, I can tell you on assessment, over 95% of companies and public entities that I assess do not have proper authentication on their email. It is not, MFA, multi-factor authentication as an example, is not enforced. They're often not encrypting them. They often don't have adequate email filters. And when you consider the statistic that 94% of all breaches start with an email, well, you probably should secure your email, right, properly. And that's,
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
That's true in government and private organizations, right? Yeah. No matter who you are, you can secure email.
So is this due to just a basic lack of security hygiene, or is it a budgetary thing, or is it something altogether different that people are saying you're not going to, don't mess with my email, basically?
Well, there's an old statistic, and I'm sure I'm going to misquote it, but frankly, internal IT folks are focused on maintenance, right? At the end of the day, most of their time is spent on fighting fires, dealing with user issues. There's frankly just not a focus on security, and there's legitimately a non-focus on it, frankly, because they're doing other things. They don't have time to do it all. And frankly, in most organizations, not just public ones, IT is undermanned. There's not enough human beings to do this well. And it's especially true in public organizations, right? Where frankly, I'm actively working with a county government. They are grossly understaffed and they are grossly inadequately secured. Their email has no multi-factor authentication. So I have a case where I'm working this right now where law enforcement email systems are not secure.
I've heard this so many times, and every single time it's, I always just kind of shake my head, because it seems like if you are a head understaffed and under the gun all the time, that you would really pound the table, if you will, over cybersecurity and proper cybersecurity hygiene, because it is quite literally the thing that's going to protect you. It is the difference between a protected network and one that is, just might as well be made out of Swiss cheese. But it seems like cybersecurity conversations kind of fall by the wayside when there are staffing issues. So do you think that, is it then does it then become a technology problem? I mean, do they just kind of throw more technology at it and hope it goes away? What's the answer?
To be frank with you, it's a leadership problem. It starts at the top. It's not just in private, but also in public entities. At the end of the day, you need leaders who are aware of the problems and are willing to regularly assess for problems, right? They need clarity on what their risks truly are. What risks are we accepting? I can tell you most leaders through our assessments don't know. They don't know until we inform them. They have internal folks that have probably been telling them, but they're not hearing, right? It's not registering. And so I often recommend that organizations at least assess their technical controls annually, at the very least, preferably every 6 months actually would be better. What we see, Charlene, is that in the industry, most assessments are actually compliance focused, right? They're measuring them against the public standards like NIST and CIS 18. The problem is those types of assessments are focused on policy, written policy. While written policies are absolutely critical, it's the tech and the people that keep you secure, right? So if those are not orchestrated well, and the policies, of course, don't align, you've got major problems. So you could have the best security program in the world, but if the technical controls are not implemented and configured properly, you're going to be breached. And this is what we see time and time again, not just in private, but also public entities. They often have policies. The controls are not adequate, and they're not. And if they do have controls, they're not being monitored. They're not being administered. And frankly, they don't have the people to do it. So I would argue that it's very firstly important that leadership become aware. And two, they choose to be aware through regular assessment. And frankly, I would argue that IT, if they were going to bang their hands on the table for something, it should be for regular assessment, because frankly, it gives them a voice. It gives them a much louder voice with leadership than what they will have on their own. Because to be frank with you, I love IT folks. I am one, but most of them are not very well suited for communicating with leaders, right? They talk in bits and bytes, and leadership often doesn't understand bits and bytes. They understand dollars and cents and business language.
Yes, and that is a great point, because you've got IT folks and you got business folks speaking two different languages. So then, does it become a question of does the business side need to learn IT, or does the IT side need to learn how to speak in a business language? And I think we both know that actually the right answer is both. But until that happens, the IT sector really needs to have the conversations with the business leaders in a language that they understand, which is the bottom line at the end of the day. How's it going to impact the business?
Right. Hire a translator. Right. I think it's frankly going to be very difficult to teach IT folks to speak business. Right. I think what would be more important, is for the leaders to recognize that they're never going to speak business and hire a translator. And I think that's where the process of assessment will work very well. And frankly, it will work very well in government. And, depending on what state you're looking at, various governmental entities are run different ways. But I would argue that whether they're elected leaders or not, they need to be made aware. And frankly, they should do that through the process of assessment. And frankly, someone who's going to look at the tech, not just the policies.
Good points. Well, John, I hope this becomes less of an issue, but I kind of get the feeling we're closer to the beginning of this than we are the end. So I guess what it's going to take is a whole lot of drum beating about the importance of locking down email systems and other ways in which hackers and threat actors can access the network. But until we get there, I guess we're just going to have to keep having conversations like this and hope that things get better. But thank you so much for taking the time and having the conversation with me about this particular topic. It's fascinating, and it really does kind of make you think about the different ways in which hackers and threat actors are able to access personal information. And frankly, it's kind of terrifying. So thanks so much. I do appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been fun.
All right, great. All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more Techstrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
Looking for a live conference focused on the tools, technologies, and practices most important to your business? Innotech conferences are live one-day business and technology conferences highlighting the latest in trends for IT leaders, developers, and IT professionals. Each event combines education, innovation, peer-to-peer networking, and the latest technology and business solutions for a diverse IT-focused audience. Innotech conferences occur throughout the year in strategic regional locations, bringing together technology professionals from various industries to learn about the solutions, practices, and tools impacting their day-to-day work and gain insight into what's to come. Presenters at Innotech conferences are selected and curated to ensure each session provides the most up-to-date and relevant information without any hype. Whether you're interested in digital transformation, cybersecurity, cloud, IT leadership, or DevOps, Innotech conferences deliver. 2022 events are scheduled to be held in Austin, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Houston, and Washington, D.C. Innotech conferences are produced by Techstrong Live and powered by Techstrong Group.
Hey everybody, happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the webinar's preview. First up, we've got applying the 2022 OSSRA findings to software supply chain risk management. This one is happening tomorrow, Tuesday, May 17th at 1 p.m. Eastern on Security Boulevard. This is sponsored by Synopsys. According to the 2022 Open Source Security and Risk Analysis, or OSSRA report, the overwhelming majority of software development organizations are leveraging open source to build their applications. However, the scale of use creates a growing management challenge. While development and risk management teams scramble to patch vulnerabilities, decipher complex license terms governing obligations associated with the use of each open source component, and stay up to date with component versions, another consideration begs attention. How does this open source risk affect my software supply chain? So in this webinar, they're going to be discussing what a software supply chain looks like, how open source introduces risks to a software supply chain, and how to apply the OSSRA findings to reduce your software supply chain risk. The second webinar is called Shift Left Done Right. This one is happening Wednesday, May 18th. That's day after tomorrow. This one is at 11 a.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. It's sponsored by Checkpoint. In today's world, all major processes are automated. Coding, build, testing, monitoring, deployment, and compute layer. Servers come and go, and storage is allocated within minutes. The sheer complexity of keeping up with the pace of the entire software development lifecycle requires us to come up with a technology that can tame the complexity of security in such a rapidly changing tech world and enable more people to become security experts. In this webinar, they'll discuss how organizations can shift security left while also making it technologically accessible. All right, the third and final webinar for today's preview is Defending Against Emerging Ransomware Threats. This one is happening Monday, May 23rd at 1 p.m. Eastern on Security Boulevard. As ransomware attacks and attackers become more sophisticated, cybercriminal gangs will rely less on broad-based attacks and more on remote code execution using malware designed for specific targets. Cybercriminals who launch ransomware attacks are becoming more efficient. This editorial webinar features a lineup of all-star guests offering their perspective on the current security landscape and how organizations can best protect themselves against ransomware. Another very good one there. All right, that's it for the webinar's preview. I'll be back tomorrow with some more for you. Until then, I hope you stay safe and have a great day. All right, we are back and closing out Techstrong TV. Today we've got the View with Vizard. In this one, Mike Vizard is speaking with Jason Shepard, who is the Vice President of Ecosystem at Zedata. They discuss why deploying Kubernetes at the edge can be a unique challenge. Great conversation, and certainly a very topical subject as well. Kubernetes and cloud native, it's all about the Benjamins, folks. Not really, but it's a great conversation. So let's go ahead and roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Jason Shepard, who's VP of Ecosystems for Zedata. They are helping to drive Kubernetes out to the edge, and we're going to talk about why that's different than just about any other distribution use case for Kubernetes. Jason, welcome to the show.
How you doing? Thanks for having me.
What exactly does make putting Kubernetes out at the edge so much more different than what we may see in a data center or even up in the cloud for that matter?
I mean, first and foremost, it's really the distribution scale. I mean, centralized data centers, we are working in smaller numbers, in kind of dense locations. And once you get out to the edge, which we should, of course, talk about what is the edge, because it means different things to everybody. But it's the high deployment scale, fewer IT resources out there. A lot of times the devices have, or the hardware you're deploying to has fewer resources, all of these types of things that are just different than traditional centralized data centers.
And when I push that out to the edge, is that something that I'm going to centrally manage from a cloud or an on-premise environment, or what is the best approach to doing that?
Typically, you want to be managing from some sort of central location, from some cloud-based location, because these assets, when you're doing edge, it could be manufacturing floor, retail store, out in an oil refinery, out in a truck, somewhere. I've seen examples of all the cases. You do not want to be sending people out to manage on-prem. The caveat to that is for certain types of businesses where they just will not be cloud connected, for security concerns, anything around IP, whatever. Even though with Kubernetes and the fundamental management is in the infrastructure plane versus the data plane, your data can still be on-prem. Some people just will not touch the cloud for any number of reasons. If I'm running a nuclear plant, I probably will not willy-nilly connect up to the cloud. It just depends on the business, but ideally it's centrally located, the controller.
And where do you guys fit in this ecosystem? Are you providing the control plane or the connectivity, or where does you guys come into the picture?
Yeah, so Zedata, so we're all about infrastructure management. We're, the underlying hardware, zero-touch provisioning of the hardware. We have an operating system as part of our offer, so I'll talk about that. Bootstrapping the runtime of choice for Kubernetes, whether you're doing K3S or K8 or micro, there's so many different distributions popping up. But all of that lower level management below your Kubernetes distribution, and then you choose what console you want on the back end, whether it's SUSE Rancher or could be any number of things. What's fundamentally different is that when you're in the data center and you're in a central location, you can, at smaller volumes, you can kind of script in and it can be a little painful to maybe bootstrap a Kubernetes cluster, but it's okay because it's more centralized and, lower scale factor. Try to go do that manual work 100, if not 1,000 or 10,000 times out in highly distributed areas, and it's really, really hard. What we do is make it super easy, like clicks of buttons to deploy those initial run times, whatever Kubernetes distribution, maybe you're wanting to run legacy VMs next to it. It could be anything. I'm a technician. I don't know anything about IT. I take a box off a truck that's running EvoS, the open source operating system we leverage. It bootstraps to our cloud orchestrator, zCloud, which is where you do infrastructure management from a central location. It's a SaaS offer. You click some buttons, it zero-touch provisions, does secure provisioning down to silicon, all these layers of features, and then you just click a button and a couple buttons, and you can form Kubernetes clusters, on the fly. And then from there, you use whatever tools you want, in the back end.
Initially, when Kubernetes first came to the fore, it was managed pretty much by either full stack developers or DevOps teams. Is that changing in the age of the edge? Is that going to be more of an IT operations network admin team, or how does that differ?
Well, if you're doing the underlying infrastructure, it's typically, IT admins, network folks. You could have OT, operations technology people doing it. Like there's usually different people that manage infrastructure versus DevOps and the application plane and doing data and all that kind of stuff. The edge makes it especially complicated because they're not all having to hit a central location. They could be in the middle of nowhere or highly distributed, as we're saying. It completely changes how you have to do it. And then the other thing is when I'm forming Kubernetes clusters in a central location, I don't really care what servers it's running on. I'm basically just looking at resources and form clusters kind of dynamically in this centralized location. When I'm at the edge, like out in the field, out of the traditional data center, it's very, very based on location. I need to know, the cluster is formed of these nodes in this area physically, and these are the constraints that I have. It completely changes the considerations for how you deploy it. I will say anyone that's talking Kubernetes at the edge that hasn't contemplated that lower level foundation, the kind of stuff that Zadita's doing, hasn't actually deployed Kubernetes at the edge, at scale. It's really challenging.
And what exactly is the edge these days? Because I think I lost count. There must be at least 5 different flavors. And
yeah.
I'm not even counting mobile devices.
Yeah. Well, and I would contend that they're part of it. A lot of people are like, I've been doing edge computing for years. It's like, well, if you've been doing traditional on-prem applications just running in your data center, you're not, that's traditional on-prem applications. That's legacy stuff. The edge contends that you have, in some fashion, you still are contemplating the cloud. That could be that it's a continuum and you're pre-processing data, sending it to the cloud for more processing. Could be that you're training AI models in the cloud, but then deploying them completely autonomously at the edge. But it's part of a continuum. Yes, a lot of people are myopically talking about edge. Whatever I sell, that's the edge. It's I sell telco connectivity, that's the edge. Or I'm an IT data center, OEM. There you go. I make constrained devices. That's the edge. So the best way to look at it, it's a continuum, and there's inherent trade-offs across that continuum. So I go from highly constrained devices that have to have embedded software. No Kubernetes there. It's literally written, purpose-built for the hardware, all the way up, it's like a toaster is a little bit different than a car, which is a little bit different than a smart light bulb or whatever. Very constrained. Cars are a little bit unique, and then I go up to regional data centers at the other extreme, just below the internet exchange to the cloud. I want to centralize stuff on the right side. If it's latency sensitive, no one's going to die if your Netflix shuts off, but you want it to perform well. I want to go across lots of users. So that's the service provider edge. That's one extreme. That's data center tools. Kubernetes comes down. Some evolution for how do you get to a little bit larger scale factor? How do you do it? You manage it centrally. But generally, just an evolution from what we do today in the cloud, at that regional metro area. And as you keep going towards the physical world, the edges get more and more constrained. You have to start assuming that as you get out of the data center, someone could walk up and touch that box. You have to assume that you're going to lose connection between the box and the controller. And most data center tools assume that the controller has a constant connection to the server, and you're on fiber. So all these, the boxes have to phone home and say, hey, what am I supposed to be running? Because you cannot, a controller phoning the box, won't work through a firewall. And so all these differences start picking up the closer you get to the physical world. And so what Zadita is doing from a orchestration standpoint, so management and security of that infrastructure, edge infrastructure, it could be from a intelligent IoT gateway. Our footprint is 512 megs of memory. That's the tax you pay to then be able to have all this flexibility on top to run Kubernetes workloads, VMs, containers, doesn't matter, deep security, etc. You start at that footprint, and it bleeds into the traditional data center where then those types of tools pick up. But that spectrum is not really addressable by current data center tools. People are trying, that starts to fall apart for all those different reasons. So they're actually, the data center paradigm is coming down. We started as low as you can go footprint wise on a box until you just have to go embedded, custom code for the silicon. Our solution starts to lose relevance as you get up to the data center, and the data center solutions start to fall apart as you come down. And when they're hitting each other is where our intersection point, is. The ultimate goal is extend the cloud experience as far into the physical world until it breaks. Mm-hmm. I want to think about resources. I don't want to think about the hardware. I just want to run, apps, and I want to, have this amount of networking and storage and dedicate this app to that GPU or CPU cores or whatever. And I want to buy it and consume it as a service. And so that's, we offer that out at the edge, and then you choose what applications you want to run on top of. And it just feels like the cloud, but out in the field.
One of the things we are seeing is that at the edge, we are processing the data and analyzing it at the point where it is being created and consumed, right? We're not doing this kind of round trip all the time to a data center or a cloud to process that workload. Do you think as we keep moving down this path, there may come a day relatively soon when there might be more workloads at the edge than there are up in the cloud or the data center for that matter?
I don't think that there'll be more. I think it all grows together, but it also depends on what you define as the edge. One of the taglines we use is the edge is the last cloud to build. So where does the cloud stop and the edge begin? Because, as you see more of these cloud-like principles being extended further out, this notion of I want to buy stuff as a service. I just want to think about resources and it's composable and just click buttons and whatever. In that context, where you could say the cloud is actually bleeding down to my manufacturing floor, and there's this sort of bleed, fringe kind of condition there. It's not going to be a binary thing. So that's where it's kind of hard to answer that question. Do I think more workloads are going to be distributed? Absolutely. Than they are centralized. In a perfect world, we would centralize everything. The clouds are giving you easy button, but then you get locked in. The easy button always sounds good until you get the bill. And so for these reasons, I think people were really moving towards the cloud over the past number of years. But now as more data gravity picks up there and people realize the implications of that and the cost of moving data, all the reasons why, latency issues, all the reasons why edge is happening now, we're going to see more distribution. Where everything's running long-term, it's hard to say, but so the best thing to do right now is architect today to be able to move workloads anywhere along that continuum. And it's a balance of performance and cost, and security needs and all that. Invest in solutions that help you move workloads across the continuum, while also recognizing there are inherent trade-offs, things like, footprint and, don't call us, we'll call you, in terms of what direction things communicate and will I always have connectivity or not, all those things we mentioned. Architects, because you just don't know, and make sure that you decouple the infrastructure, like your core foundation, from all the applications and the data, because then you're a free agent. You can do whatever you want to do, and as things evolve, they will evolve. You're not stuck. And that's a big focus for us. We're not in the data path. We're not trying to do applications. We're just trying to make it really easy to scale data center principles out of the data center, but then you have your choice of technologies around that for flexibility.
So you're king for a day and you can do anything you want in the land of Kubernetes. What's the one thing you wish that somebody would do on your behalf to make it easier to deploy Kubernetes and manage it and install it at the edge?
I think they should call Zadita. No, I mean, it's painful. I mean, it's, we see a lot of people experimenting with it. We see a lot of people I've seen a lot of conversations around, well, you must have Kubernetes at the edge. Not necessarily. You could just be running simple containers or, a VM, some application. Why you would run Kubernetes at the edge is, of course, scalability, scale out locally, resilience, redundancy, things like that. But you don't need all of the same features as you do need in the back end. So if there's one thing that I would want people to understand is infrastructure management is not the same as application management. And so many people are confused about that right now. They look at us and, or anyone like us, anyone in this space, and they're like, you do exactly what company X does. you're completely overlapped with Scissor Rancher and K3S. Actually, no, it's quite complementary because, they're different planes. So if it came for the day, I would want people to, get educated, I guess, and kind of realize the value. There's a lot of different players doing things, but it's not about one person doing everything.
All right. My layers have layers. Hey, Jason, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. Back to you guys in the studio.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, that wraps up another Techstrong TV broadcast for today. We'll be back tomorrow with a brand new one. Just want a quick reminder, last week we had our Inotech Dallas event, and it was a great event. I'm sorry if you were not able to join us, but we did do some live streaming of some of the events or some of the sessions at the event, and we are going to be putting together a Best of Inotech virtual event later in this year that combines some of the best sessions from not only the Dallas, but also the recent Inotech Austin and the upcoming Houston, Oklahoma City, and I believe Washington, D.C. events. So stay tuned for that. That's going to be happening later in the year. Next week, we've got a couple events happening in Boston. Both are one-day roadshow style events. One is DevOps Cloud Native Live, hosted by DevOps.com, and the other is Cybersecurity Live, and that is hosted by Security Boulevard. They are both happening in Boston at the Aloft, I think over at the Harbor, maybe? I can't remember, but it is. They are May 26th and 27th, I believe it is. But you can go on to, I think it's Cloud Native Boston or cybersecurityboston.com to check out the whole lineup of speakers and register. We also have KubeCon coming up this week, actually. So we're going to be doing some live streaming from KubeCon over the course of Wednesday and Thursday of this week. KubeCon is happening in Valencia, Spain, so we've got a bit of a time difference here. So it's not going to be at the usual time that Techstrong TV runs. But do check the website, and we'll be live streaming some interviews during the 2-day event. So looking forward to that as well. I won't be there, but I'll be here kind of manning the stations, if you will. I will also be back here tomorrow with a brand new Techstrong TV broadcast. So until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.